the story of the successful passage of a law that made it possible for the government to offer up to 50% of per pupil funding to private schools. Now that legislation was passed in 1977. We moved here, my family, my two kids, my wife and I. In 1971, our kids were all going through public school at the time, and this really surprised us. We just didn't notice what was going on in the background politically, socially, in the province, and particularly in the Lower Mainland, from the late 1960s, before we got here, and the early 1970s, right up to 1978, when the government passed Bill 33, which is the essential legislation that permitted this. So it's an interesting story because one of the things that made the government take courage and pass that law was parental involvement. It was parental involvement from Dutch Calvinist immigrants between Langley, Abbotsford, Chilliwack, and so on. We can say ethnically that there's a clear characterization here. The Federation of Independent School Associations, which was founded in 1966, had been pushing for public funding for private schooling for several years already in the late 1960s, from 1966 on. So they had that too. They had an ethnic group and a province-wide organization of volunteers like yourselves, except on the other side of the spectrum, i.e. they were for private schooling. They spent a certain amount of money on publicity and advertising in what was then the press. That is, in those days, something that appeared on pieces of paper. There were 3 or 4 of them in the Lower Mainland, and there were weeklies as well. Now we're down to possibly 1/4 as many pieces of paper that are available to us to advertise in. But we have the social media and all sorts of other methods that we could use to get the message out. But the 2 key ingredients were the decision to go with an ethnically remarkable, solid base group which could reliably provide money, time, and energy for the campaign to bring in public funding for private schools, and FISA, the Federation of Independent School Associations. And I want to go on. It wasn't just the Dutch Calvinists. It was German-speaking Protestants. And of course, one of the largest groups of all, I still haven't mentioned, which is the Catholics. Catholic education in British Columbia was not provided under a separate school system the way it is in the other 9 provinces. It had all been private until 1978. And the Catholic parents in the province, and I understand their position to some extent, felt that this just wasn't fair. If the rest of the country could produce public education funded 100%, why couldn't we do that in British Columbia, funded 100%? Well, they never got 100%, but they certainly have got between 30 and 50, depending on the budget of the school involved. So the decision to be frank about this and to be clear about where your constituencies are, not to be shy, but to go out and do hard-nosed politics and to organize provincially through a thing like FISA. Well, you have PAN and PACE and so on. You have the elements of a framework. Whether you're tough-minded enough and mean enough to do what FISA did and the various groups that constitute that interest group, I'm not sure. I think we should be free and willing to do what has to be done to achieve our objectives.